Welcome back, everybody. This is Brian and Brian for Breaking Down Security. We're all really happy to be here, aren't we, Mr. Betcher?
That's right.
We are going to try something new this week. We're hoping that it doesn't blow up in our face and the sweaty palms are getting me. We actually have a guest this week. His name is Guillaume Ross. He is from America's 52nd state, Canada. He's actually sitting in our green room right now. We lured him here with poutine and hockey videos, and he's really happy to be here. So I just wanted to welcome Guillaume to the show.
Nice to meet you guys. How's everyone doing?
We're doing awesome.
Little sweaty and awkward places right now, but I think this is going to work. So,
well, it should work, right? I'm in your green room, so there should be no network connectivity issues whatsoever.
Yes, it's all going to work out. I can almost guarantee it. So let's go ahead and get started. We are talking about basically all things cloud security, cloud data, kind of some big data issues maybe. Why don't we first start out by finding out how Guillaume got to where he is today?
Well, I've been working in IT for about 12, 13 years now. I started working really in IT infrastructure, doing first help desk and then sysadmin jobs and so on. And then I moved on and worked at some really, some big three-letter outsourcing companies, doing a lot of Active Directory work, a lot of Microsoft infrastructure-related work. And I realized that I was always a guy who cared about security on these projects, and because there's a lot of identity management related to those, I was always ending up, really caring about the security. So I figured I should probably work in information security. So about 4 or 5 years ago, I just switched and I became a consultant, and I've been doing information security since then. Mostly infrastructure security, network security, and for the past 2 years, I've done mostly cloud security, both for clients that use the cloud as consumers, but also for clients that sell cloud services, and some of which also run on infrastructure as a service. So they use the cloud and they sell a cloud product. So you're kind of sitting in the middle. So these are, different challenges, and it's been pretty fun. And, the cloud is gaining, and there's more and more types of companies that use it. So it's going to be a fun ride. There's still some issues, but that's what we're going to talk about, right?
Exactly. So I guess we should to maybe do some definitions. What do we consider the cloud? I know it started off kind of like the Visio diagram icon for the cloud.
Maybe we use that a lot. Huh?
Yeah, exactly. I was one of my questions is, how does the cloud differ from like a data center? When big companies have data centers and then they want to move everything to the cloud, isn't that like saying let's move it to a different data center that we don't control?
Well, that's just one little part of it, but I think what's really important for a service to be considered cloud is elasticity as well as being on demand. So it's got to be something where you can just request more of it or start using less of it, and it typically is delivered over the internet, though there's obviously some public cloud, private cloud differentiations there. But if it's not something you can ask more of or get more of easily and just pay for what you need, then it's not really cloud. So if you just have one big data center that probably set you back a few $1 million at least, that's not really elastic, and that won't let you scale as easily as using, let's say, Amazon Web Services. So
Okay.
that my definition of the cloud is pretty much based on that.
So it's more of a dynamic allocation and deallocation of resources?
Yeah, that's one important part. The financial aspect of it is also really important. Just pay for what you need. And then you get into what's infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, which are the three most common types of cloud usage. Infrastructure being the most well-known, or what we really consider cloud, and software as a service obviously has always been popular, and it's really close to what we used to call application service providers. Platform as a service is probably the most interesting, and it's gaining. It hasn't been as popular as infrastructure as a service in the last few years, but I think it's going to gain a lot of users in the next few years.
Okay. So can you help me understand the idea of elasticity? It seems to me that the cloud still has a finite amount of resources, Does elasticity just allow you to refactor your use of that cloud on the fly? Is that the idea?
Well, the idea is your cloud provider should have way more capacity than you will ever need, right? Because if you need more capacity that they could provide, yeah, of course, it's not really going to be elastic. But if you're using one of the big providers and you're just like a normal company, especially if you're doing something that's compute intensive, yes, elasticity is going to be pretty interesting. So you have to think of things in a different mindset. Your applications need to be cloud aware. Of course, if you just take your enterprise software and you just install it on some VMs that are running in Microsoft Azure or running in Amazon, that's not going to be much different from running them in VMware at your own data center. But if you take advantage of the APIs that they have, if you take advantage of the fact that you can just boot up hundreds of VMs and just compute some stuff, and when you're done, turn them off, then you can get into some really interesting performance savings and cost savings. So one example would be, what if you have something that takes 10 hours to compute, but it's really it's something that you can really easily split into smaller jobs. Well, why wouldn't you split it into 100 computers and do it 100 times faster if it wasn't going to cost you more? And as more and more providers bill you by the minute, that's something that we can do. So Microsoft Azure used to bill by the hour, which made elasticity pretty hard because it didn't make sense to make anything faster than a 1 hour job, right? Because if you're spinning up 1,000 VMs to do something in 5 minutes, you would still end up paying for 1,000 hours.
Sure.
But a while ago, probably like a year and a half ago, they changed that. So they're always bringing that down and making it more granular. So I have one client that's been, spinning up 500 to 1,000 VMs to do jobs that used to take days because they used to be run like single-threaded desktop computers and that kind of stuff. So it doesn't cost them more. The results come in way faster, and their clients are really, really happy about that. So I think that's the typical cloud usage where everyone sees the benefit of using the cloud there.
That sounds more like supercomputing to me. I mean, what's the difference?
Well, the difference is supercomputing typically is not something that's easily available to anyone. So that specific use case that I'm talking about was a brand new product that's was just created a few months before that, and they would never have had the resources to purchase that kind of computing power. So you start smaller, and then all of a sudden one client says, "Hey, you got this running in 1 hour, but I'd like to get it in 10 minutes." Oh yeah, sure, we can do that. The infrastructure is built for it. The data center is big enough. It's not our data center, but we know they can take it. And off you go. And a few weeks later, you've got your auto scaling, and it's working great. So these are cases where the benefits of the cloud are a really good value proposition. So that's when the security concerns and compliance concerns and all of these issues become something that has to fight against the obvious value of using the cloud. So when you've got this really nice use case, well, no one's going to stop because you say, oh, well, the cloud is not secure and we need to keep control of our data. Of course, there's some data that you really do need to keep control of. But when you start looking at the risk, but you also look at the value, then there's some use cases where it's just too interesting and it's going to happen. So you need to find a way to use the cloud in a secure enough way, because people are going to use it.
Do you think that companies talk about it not being secure because they don't understand the controls that are put into place? I mean, a lot of these companies like, you mentioned Microsoft already. I think EC2 from Amazon is another one.
Yeah.
There's HP has a big cloud. Oracle's got it, as well as another big one is Rackspace. Do you think it's because companies are afraid to move into the cloud because it's like the Wild West, it's the great unknown? They don't know if they're actually going to be able to protect their data, or do you think they just run headlong into it because it's going to save them money and that's really the bottom line?
It depends on the industry, I guess. So the more regulated an industry is, the more they'll be afraid of sending any data externally, cloud or just any type of outsourcing deal. But a few reasons why the companies would be afraid of it is, first of all, they don't necessarily understand everything that's going on at the cloud provider, and sometimes that is the cloud provider's fault because some information is not that easy to find. So if you Amazon has a lot of good information and they're moving really fast. Microsoft is moving really fast as well, but sometimes you try to find the exact segregation of duty between this and that. You can't always find that, or ask, a big software as a service company to tell you how many of their employees could actually go and read your data either directly on the systems or through, whatever support process that they have. And really often you won't get a straight answer. They don't want to answer those questions. So if you don't get a straight answer, well, my tendency is to assume the worst. If you can't prove that what's happening is really good, then I'm going to have to assume that it's not that good, right? And some of these companies don't share as much information as I think they should, but they've been getting better. I mean, it's definitely more open now than 2-3 years ago. And I think a big reason for that is they've been getting better at it, so they're willing to share more.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, Amazon is probably is running in front of everyone else as far as features go, and security features are part of that. So they're good market leaders right now. I've read something. I think it was Gartner that released their new infrastructure as a service Magic Quadrant, Magic dodecahedron or whatever, and they were saying Amazon is 7 times, their infrastructure as a service is something like 7 times bigger than everyone else's combined. And that seems believable because, yeah, that's how big they are.
Yeah. Well, they're billion-dollar business, and they're burning $100 bills to keep warm at night, I'm sure. So,
well, and they have a lot to gain by convincing big companies that using these type of services can be done securely. So they're kind of the trailblazers there, and you saw that they won a big deal with the U.S. Intelligence community.
mm-hmm.
But for that specific use case, they're building like a completely separate availability zone. They're making like a community cloud for these U.S. customers. So it's not the same as the public Amazon, but it's not the same as a completely dedicated cloud either. So I think that's going to help as well.
Now, do the client compliance standards have to equal what the provider standards are?
Well, you really have to look at what the data that you're putting in there is. And in some cases, well, of course, it's good that your provider has some standards and follows them and so on. But in some cases, if you do a good job using encryption, if you do a good job managing your keys, there's some ways where you can ensure that the amount of access to your data that the provider is going to get is not as high. But sometimes that's really difficult. So for example, doing client-side encryption and keeping your keys on premises and so on, that's not the typical thing that people who use the cloud do, right? The typical thing that you see is, we use, let's say, Amazon, and we just put everything in Amazon, and we use the default settings, and that's how it is.
Uh-huh.
And that's not really good. That's typically not good enough for most kinds of data. But when you start doing a lot of encryption, you still have to really look at what you want to protect, because you have to remember that by using encryption, you could lose some features. So for example, if it's a database and you're using, an Amazon database instance running PostgreSQL or MySQL or whatever, it's not that easy to encrypt every field and expect searching to work and sorting to work and so on. So there's some third parties that have some interesting features like schema preserving encryption algorithms, but typically those would not necessarily be as bulletproof as other encryption mechanisms. So you need to really balance the need for protection of the data and the need for usability. So of course, I mean, if your threat model is the NSA wants my data, it's probably a really bad idea to get into the cloud, but they're probably still going to get it anyways. You need to really make sure that you protect your data from the provider. That's one thing, but I think that what's more important is protect your data from the rest of the internet, because the biggest risk is we're used to think of our servers as being behind firewalls, and we have network zones, and then we think, okay, if we mess up with some permissions and we give access to the wrong person, at least it's going to be internal and so on. But I think one of the biggest problems right now is if you're using, let's say, Amazon, and you have a bunch of data in S3 buckets Well, you're only one click away from making it available to the internet. And if it's not encrypted, that could turn bad really fast. So as far as compliance goes, when you're speaking to an auditor who doesn't have experience with Amazon APIs, he doesn't know the tools that you might have built in-house to make sure that these kind of things don't happen, well, it's pretty normal that he's not going to feel confident with seeing that, yeah, you could just change one permission and then everyone on the internet has access to that bucket.
Yep.
And the only thing protecting it is the fact that people don't know the URL to it. That is something that's going to make them feel uneasy. So I would really suggest that if you're a company that's new to the cloud, look at your use cases, look at the type of data that might not be as critical, look at the type of data that you would save a lot of money by putting it in there, and start with that. And then as you become more comfortable with more advanced features and so on, then you can move to other stuff. And if you just want, like, dumb storage is pretty easy because we have good tools now to encrypt your data on site before you upload it. But to me, that's the least interesting use case of the cloud. I mean, you're just dumping data in S3 and it's encrypted. You can't even use it there. So it's mostly a backup. So when you want to start doing actual computing there, it becomes more complicated. But so gain experience by using data that is not as important. Then you're going to build your internal tools. If you need some third-party stuff, you're going to build that up. You're going to become comfortable with monitoring the logs there, maybe doing some configuration management there, and just don't try to do everything at once, and don't try to convince everyone at once.
Yeah. So you were mentioning there a little while ago about the fact that the government can go to cloud providers and ask for. I think we've saw just recently with TrueCrypt, which was a true shame that the developers just up and quit, and a lot of people had surmised that. The farewell letter that they'd sent out basically saying is no longer secure was due to result of an NSL or a national security letter here the United States might have put out. If you have data in the cloud and you said that you got to be careful what data you put in the cloud, is there really any kind of data you can put in the cloud that you are not worried about losing? I mean, most companies have either code or they have, I don't know if they'd want to put email in the cloud or websites maybe, I guess, would be about the only thing I could think you'd want to put in the cloud. Databases tend to hold a lot of, really important information. Is there any specific, without using regular encryption before it's sent to the cloud, is there any other kind of software you'd want to put, or not software, but data in the cloud that you would want to put that wouldn't be encrypted? You
mentioned email. If you think about email, right now it goes over SMTP. Most people only do opportunistic encryption. So you can consider pretty much any email that you're going to send out of your company to be compromised. So really, if you're using a cloud provider for your email, the only difference is maybe your internal email is not going to be as secure as it was before. So for email, I think it's doable, especially for companies that are not heavily regulated. And people often think about the fact that cloud is multi-tenant or whatever, but that's not the most interesting or the riskiest part. Then you mentioned the government. Well, if you're an American company or a Canadian company or cloud or not, they can just show up and get your data. It doesn't really matter where it is. And a lot of these big companies, they already had like outsourcing deals or whatever. The data is already in that country. It could be seized. And I don't think for companies, most of the time, I don't think that's that big of a concern. That might be a bigger concern for individuals. But for companies, all they're trying to do is provide a service or sell a product and turn a profit. And there's laws and they have to respect them. So it doesn't really matter if it's Google that has your email or they're physically in your data centers in the US for that.
So you were mentioning Google just now and email. Do you find that a lot of companies are moving away from the big, huge exchange servers and moving towards like Google Apps, for instance, for email or other services? I know they document collaborations are available. I have a Google Apps account, so I have email through another domain. Do you find that is a viable cloud-based alternative for companies to use?
Yeah, well, it is. And Office 365 has been gaining quite a bit recently as well. But one thing that Office 365 does that Google does not, and that I don't think Google will ever do, is they provide like dedicated instances where it's more like Microsoft is going to manage your Exchange instances and so on, but they're yours. Obviously, Google doesn't do that because Google's strength is the Google file system and the replication, and it's not their game to start providing custom solutions to clients. The only exception would probably be they have a government edition of the Google apps, but that's as custom as it gets. But I think Office 365 is gaining a little faster. Well, from what I see, that's really not a scientific observation, but I think Office 365 is gaining a little bit more in the big enterprise shops, more than Google. And big part of that could be that everyone is already using Exchange, everyone's already using Outlook.
So many
And
things.
everyone's already using Office. And by moving to that, well, I mean, there's some cost savings, but you get to keep a similar client. It comes with Office licenses as well. So it's a nice financial proposition. Plus, they have some cool stuff for security if your concern was multi-tenancy and so on, if that was critical for you, which Google does not do. But I see a lot of people using Google, and one thing I checked a few maybe 6 months ago, maybe a little bit more than that, when the Snowden thing was still new. Just for fun, I picked like 10 US newspapers for fun, and I just started looking at their MX records. And most of them, I don't remember if it was 7 or 8 of them, but they're all using Google. At least the first hop was Google. So if they're not using Google Apps for their whole email stack, they were at least going through that for spam filtering purposes or antivirus or whatever. So that was kind of an eye opener, because I realized that even if you're not using Google, it doesn't really change much because most of your email is still going there.
Sure.
So I think secure email is kind of pretty much doomed unless you use PGP or something like that.
Yeah.
In which case your metadata is not protected, which seems to be the most interesting part anyway.
Yeah. I'd heard that the next there had been rumors the next iteration of Google Mail was going to support PGP, probably for secure purposes. But
well, I mentioned external email versus internal. So if all of your internal email was encrypted with something like PGP and your keys were kept offsite, well, by offsite I mean off Google, then there's not much security difference. Well, for just the data confidentiality part, if you're using internal or external. But this seems like a rumor that it doesn't really seem to fit Google's model right now to just be providing like a super awesome way to automatically encrypt everything. So I saw that as well, and I wonder, what does it mean, support PGP? I mean, are they just going to have like a PGP web plugin for Chrome that hooks into Google Mail? That could be interesting, but I'll believe it when I see it, and until then, I'll assume that this is not going to happen.
Yeah, I wonder about it. I wonder about the security of that, because you're either going to have to PGP encrypt your mail before you send it through Google, or if you give them your private key, you're still going to have the same issue as before, where you got your cloud provider providing your security keys for you. If they've got your private key, then they're going to be able to decrypt anything from that you send out anyway, and your public key is going to be available anyway. So I would find it hard to believe that they're going to do that unless they have some kind of offline app.
Yeah, well, I would be really surprised if they wanted anything to do with your private keys. That seems like the last thing a company that's as serious about security as Google would do. So if I had to guess, it would probably be a client-based thing, and it would probably leverage Chrome or Chrome extensions. We've seen sites like Mega pop up in the last 2-3 years where they're trying to do client-side crypto in the browser, and that's got like various levels of success. My rule of thumb was if you can see it in your browser, then that means the cloud provider can read your stuff, right? And that's a little less true now that we have these cloud providers that do like JavaScript crypto with your key that's being derived from a password that you're typing and so on. But that's kind of tricky, and that's not really that can work maybe for some services, but in most cases, it doesn't seem like to be like an enterprise-ready solution yet. So it's not the kind of thing I don't have any big enterprise client using Mega to store company secrets. That would probably be a really bad move right now.
How concerned should clients be about the provider having malicious insiders? I
Yeah,
mean, there's an attractive opportunity for corporate or nation state sponsored espionage, organized crime, or even just a freelance hacker with, once they get into providers,
yeah.
once they get hired, there's little risk for detection.
Yeah, what kind of protections do virtual instances or Elastic, like EC2 would have? Because I know that there have been hacks recently, or in the past year, I know of at least where somebody gets into one, like say WordPress provider, and they get into
Yeah.
one WordPress blog or something, and by that they're able to get into a number of different places.
Mhm.
What kind of security is in place for a cloud provider to make sure that say my private cloud or my EC2 functions don't inhibit, say, another major corporations just because that, poor little Brian with his 10 employee company is now going to screw a bunch of other people.
Well, these are, I think, two separate questions there.
Sure.
The first one being the insider threat from a cloud provider perspective, and the other one being like overall infrastructure as a service, isolation, security, and so on. And I think for the second one, um, you have to rely you have to trust that the hypervisor is doing its job and that it's securing your instances from the other VMs that might be running on the same box. But providers like Amazon, they also provide dedicated instances that will run on hardware where only VMs owned by the same customer will run. So that is something that, like, if you're concerned about like a VM to host to VM kind of exploitation technique, that is something that you could use. I think if there was like a really, really bad case where it was super easy to go from one VM to another in Xen or a major hypervisor like that, it would have to be fixed pretty fast because that would be a major issue for these cloud providers. Now, the cloud insider threat, well, it does exist, that's for sure. But the same thing exists in corporations, right? And if you have an enterprise that's got 10,000 employees, 50,000 employees, some have hundreds of thousands of employees and thousands of IT employees. Well, I think the same threat is definitely exists internally as well. Now, the concern is maybe it would be more, there would be more financial gain for you as a bad actor if you work for a provider that has access to a bunch of customers' different data, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you think, okay, I'm just going to steal some people's data. I might as well work for the company that has the most data about the most companies, right? And that same exact situation already exists with stuff that we don't call the cloud, which is outsourcers, right? I mean, if you work for a big three-letter company, you probably could have access to data of 20, 25 huge corporations. And it might be in their own data centers. I mean, you're just providing, let's say you're a backup specialist and you're providing backup support for these 20 companies. They're not using the cloud. They all have their own stuff, but you could still access all that. And companies make the trade-off that they assume that these providers are as good as they are about hiring and doing background checks and so on. But I think one thing that is truly lacking in the cloud right now is traceability. Um, some providers are getting better about giving you access to logs, and then you can see what's happening with your data when you access it and people access it and so on. But what's really hard to get is logs from their end. And if you ask a cloud provider, let's say, oh well, can I get the logs from whenever one of your support guys needs to access my stuff, because then I want to, cross-reference that with, I don't know, a support ticket or whatever, see if there was a purpose for
Right.
that.
Right.
It is really rare that you'll get a positive response. They'll probably just say something about like they won't do that or they can't do that or
Is
they
it because
can't
they
really do that.
can't?
And so sometimes they can't, means they can't easily do that. It's like they don't have a nice console where they can just click get customer
Right.
data, and it's stored in non-human readable file format. So of course no one can read that,
Sure.
which is the same as saying, yeah, you can't read that Word file I sent you because it's a binary file. No one has Word, right? So I think traceability from a cloud provider's perspective is important. And right now, in infrastructure as a service, at least you can control the security of your own virtual machines, and you can get the logs from your own virtual machines, right? Because you got access, your root in there.
Mm-hmm.
So you could see if something is happening in there. So for example, if you have an EC2 machine, it's secure. Let's say it's a Linux machine. It's pretty well secured. You get the logs from that. You import those logs on whatever you have in your data centers. You already have logging systems and so on. And you mount some partitions that are stored on Amazon as well. But these partitions are encrypted with, whatever file system encryption system available. If it's Windows, it could be BitLocker, it could be DMCrypt or whatever. I was going to say TrueCrypt. Might not be that good of an idea.
Yeah.
Then I think you can be reasonably safe in thinking that the cloud provider can't really read your data, because for sure the machine is booted. The key is in RAM somewhere on that physical machine, but it would take a great deal of effort. So if it's just your bad actor that just wants to steal a bunch of data from different customers, I think you made it hard enough. And if he starts having to hack into your machine, you'll see that. But if he goes up and above and he starts, I don't know, hacking the hypervisor and getting the RAM there, yeah, well, for sure you might have an issue. But that's when you have to think about like not storing state secrets there. And I think if someone is going through that much effort to get your data there, are you doing that better of a job internally? And the answer to that for most companies is no. Like cloud providers have typically pretty good separation of duty. They have pretty strict policies and processes and so on. I mean, that's all they do. So Microsoft Azure is probably run a little tighter than most companies' infrastructure management. Though you could say that they forgot to renew some certificates and that crashed their whole storage a year ago. And I mean, everyone makes mistakes, but for a lot of companies and a lot of my clients, the trade-off is acceptable for some types of computing.
So, is there a need to have the provider do vulnerability scans on all of their clients?
It depends. If we're talking about infrastructure as a service where they provide the cloud service, they provide APIs to manage virtual machines and so on, but you're the one who owns these virtual machines, I don't think they should be scanning your machines. I think it's your problem. You should be dealing with them. Now, if you're doing software as a service, obviously there's a lot more security responsibility that's on the provider side because you don't have much control. So if you can't do anything, well, they should be doing it properly. Platform as a service is kind of in between. So for example, if you're using Microsoft Azure platform as a service, the way it works, let's say you're using pretty much a pure Microsoft stack, and that's why you're using Azure. You have some .NET, ASP.NET applications running on Windows and so on. In platform as a service, well, you have some access to the virtual machines, but what's really nice is if you're not using any unmanaged code, you just go and set policies saying, okay, these are my web servers, these are my compute nodes, and so on. And okay, I never want all of my web servers to reboot at the same time. This is group A, this is group B, this is group C. Microsoft will take care of patching everything that's related to Windows. They'll shut down your VMs and boot some new ones that have a clean setup of Windows. They're going to start your application, and your application is not going to run with administrator privileges. So when that happens, you can be pretty sure that the VM is clean. Now, where the problem happens is if you're in infrastructure as a service and you think the provider is doing this for you. And this is something that I see happening because people think, and that happens mostly with smaller companies using the cloud, and they're not really, they don't really know what that means. And they think it's more managed than it is. So if you're just using a bunch of EC2 VMs, and you think because you're using whatever AMI that Amazon is providing, you don't have to do patch management, well, you're going to have a surprise. And then that turns into a bunch of VMs getting hacked because they're running like, I don't know, like a 3-year-old version of Apache.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then these VMs start being used to attack other people. And that's annoying from a defense perspective because I don't know exactly what you guys do for a living, but you've probably been attacked by some Amazon virtual machines in the past.
Sure. They become
And
botnets pretty easily.
yeah, and you can't just go and block the whole, list of
Right.
IPs that Amazon has, right? Because you probably have some legitimate stuff that's there. So it's annoying, but I don't think it's Amazon's job to scan these VMs and to help you patch them because it's infrastructure as a service. What I think is their responsibility is when they start seeing malicious traffic from these VMs, they should be cutting their access to the internet pretty fast and getting in touch with the customer to make sure that gets resolved because a false positive could be pretty bad as well. Can you imagine you're running a bunch of corporate services there and they see something that looks like a malicious attack or whatever, and they just decide to disconnect you? So I think
Yeah.
that's the balance they're trying to strike, and
Right.
it's not an easy one.
And we'll be right back with part 2 of our podcast with special guest Guillaume Ross. This has been Breaking Down Security. Have a great week.